Um, okay, and I need to make sure that it says yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Rebecca Farrell, and I am the Program and Outreach Director for Nami Central Texas. We are an affiliate of Nami Texas, which is a state organization of Nami National. And as Dana mentioned, Nami is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. She asked me to present today to talk with parents, guardians, and caregivers about mental health, especially mental health in your children. And so this presentation is aimed to provide an overview of what mental health conditions are and ways in which you can engage in conversation with your child or children whom you might suspect have a mental health condition. Although we're considered NAMI is mental illness is at the end, we have moved away from the talk about mental illness to mental health conditions. However, I do want to mention that we believe mental health conditions is just as important to address as any physical illness that people may experience and or health conditions they may experience, such as diabetes, high cholesterol, um, and other health aspects that people may experience in their lifetime. For all of those types of issues, we tend to go see our medical doctors or our holistic treatment providers. And so it's equally important for us to be able to address our mental health conditions because our brain cannot function well when it is chronically stressed. Guess it's not all right. Maybe I need to just a second, technology here. All right, so the agenda for today is I'm going to talk about the impact of our current situation. So we've been in this pandemic for over 2 years now. To understand what mental health is, to provide a teen's perspective. She's no longer a teenager. She is actually a student at the University of Austin, Texas at Austin, but she will provide an insight about what her experience was when she was a teenager, recognizing the warning signs of mental health conditions and how to effectively communicate and start the conversation, as well as talking about mental health and suicide and where to find help. So what is currently impacting our teen stress? Well, in addition to the pandemic and racism, politics, and just a snowstorm of issues that our adolescents face today, we tend to look at it through the context of a trauma lens. And so our teens are experiencing this constant uncertainty, a collective grief, navigating constant change, especially with the pandemic, leaving school, going back to school, being around friends, not being around friends and family members, juggling family stress that may include emotional stress, financial stress, especially if people were laid off because of the pandemic, just some isolation and loneliness. And they experience change in their social, physical, and educational interactions. And so it's really important for us to address the pandemic because our youth are actually going through their social emotional development. And when the pandemic hit and social isolation began, we took that as we couldn't even interact with people. We had to keep our distances. And really, our adolescents and our youth need those social interactions. Their brains need those social interactions. It's called neurobiology because it helps with their central nervous system. And so teens and youth and adolescents who have mental health conditions tend to be able to have other things to think about when they're around their friends and trusted adults. And the pandemic, when we began isolating, allowed our adolescents to be more in their heads because they weren't interacting in close proximity to their peers. So their peers really were an outlet for our adolescents. The World Health Organization says that There is not health without mental health, and that's really true. So earlier I mentioned how physical health and mental health are equally important. For our youth who are in schools, we have to think about how we put the pressure about grades, and it's important that our students excel academically, but grades are not the end all. And we want our students to understand that their mental health is extremely important in order for them to be able to excel academically. As I mentioned earlier, a chronically stressed brain does not learn. And so it is our jobs as adults to be able to provide that safe space for our adolescents to come to us to be able to talk about what they're experiencing. I do want to preface that any mental health diagnosis does come from a psychiatrist. So it is not our job to diagnose our youth or adolescents or children, but really to understand what their experiences are and to be able to find them help when they need the help. And so, why should we talk about mental health? Well, as I mentioned, it affects their ability to learn, their school attendance and participation, all of their relationships within their community, their school, family, and peers, their physical health. It affects their developmental milestones and their long term success. 1 in 6 youth live with a mental health condition. This has increased in the past couple years. Before it was just 1 in 5, 1 in 4. Now it is 1 in 6. 50% of our youth have mental health conditions and signs and symptoms by the age of 14. However, they tend not to receive help until 8 to 10 years later. Now, I want you to think about how come they don't receive help 8 to 10 years after their onset of their mental health conditions. A lot of it is rooted in stigma. We still live in a society in which we think mental illnesses, mental health conditions are only for specific people. We tend to use terms such as crazy, um, there's something not right with them. And so people associate mental health conditions with this idea that there's something wrong with people. And I want to emphasize that mental health conditions is nobody's fault. It is not your fault as a parent, caregiver, guardian. If your children have mental health conditions, it's not your children's fault at all. I think sometimes when I've worked with parents in a counseling setting, because I am trained as a mental health counselor, my license is in the state of Kentucky. So I don't practice here in Texas, but I've had over 10 years of working with children and parents with mental health conditions. A lot of times parents and guardians say to me, what did I do wrong for my child to have this mental health condition? And you did nothing wrong. They did nothing wrong. It is a brain-based disorder, mental health conditions. So sometimes our brains and our bodies don't produce enough hormones to help our brain regulate what our bodies need to be able to regulate. The other thing too is parents and guardians and caregivers may not have the knowledge or the understanding of what mental health conditions are. And so this is why we provide this presentation, is to equip you with some knowledge and the ability to know and recognize signs and symptoms of mental health conditions. Mental health treatment is going to occur more commonly for our Caucasian youth, less likely for our Asian youth. So again, mental health conditions are addressed across diversity issues, race and ethnicity, culture as well. Sorry. What do we know about mental health conditions? According to the CDC in 2021, that just this year, poor mental health is a growing problem for our adolescents. So again, 1 in 6 children ages 2 to 19 live with a mental health condition. And you may be thinking to yourself, wow, 2 years old, that's really young. If you think back to when your children were in that age of what we tend to say terrible twos, but I like to say terrific twos, to think, why is that happening? And again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about our pandemic, the stresses our families are experiencing, the lack of connection with people. And so about 15% of our children will experience one major depressive episode. That is a 1.24 increase from last year. And then about 11% of our youth will experience severe major depression. And that means that it's about 1 in 7. So 1 in 7, if you think about, we have 27 people in this room, 1 in 7, every 1 in 7 of us will have may have a youth who's experiencing a major depressive episode or depression, and also are identifying as multiracial. So even our youth who identify as multiracial tend to have higher levels of major depression. I myself am adopted. My family is white, and my siblings and my nieces all experience major depression. I would say my parents also experienced major depression as well. And it's intergenerational. So when I look back through our family tree, I can see how depression and anxiety and eating disorders all run through each generation of our family line. But we never talked about it until more recently. They're becoming more open to talking about it, probably because of my background. 24%, we see a 24% increase in ages 5 to 11 and 31% increase in ages 12 to 17 of mental health related ER visits in 2020. That is really significant. So our National Pediatric Academy said that they are seeing a huge increase in mental health related ER visits in our youth. So what does that mean? Well, we're all Texans. I hope we're all Texans, even though we are virtual. Virtual allows for other people to join. And so according to the Mental Health America, State of Mental Health in America report, we are last in access to health insurance. And you're probably thinking, well, there's only 50 states. Well, they include the District of Columbia. So we are in last place as a state. We are in 48th place for children who have private insurance that does not cover emotional and mental issues. And so 3/4 of our youth who are experiencing major depression are not receiving treatment. This is also another reason why we see an onset of 8 to 10 a year delay in receiving help for our children who are experiencing mental health conditions. I just want to mention that some of you might be thinking, well, how do I know if my child has a mental health condition? And when I work with children and parents, what I say to them is there is psychological distress and then also a mental health condition. So psychological distress is often experienced through emotions of sadness, anxiety, and anger. And they're often linked to experiences that are rooted in hurt and disappointment. So what we say is that's really common in life, right? We have all experienced sometime during our lifetime disappointment, anger, sadness, psychological distress, and that we oftentimes use self-regulation techniques to be able to overcome the emotions and our thoughts that are linked to the hurt and disappointment. Mental health conditions are linked to individual vulnerabilities. So as you all may be aware of the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences studies that are done, we look at what the risk factors are and what vulnerabilities exist for our families, especially for our youth. So those who are more vulnerable tend to be more susceptible to experiencing mental health conditions. We also base it on criteria, 2 criteria in terms of severity and persistence. So even though psychological distress and mental health conditions may have an overlap, what makes a mental health condition different from psychological distress is the severity and persistency of those signs and symptoms, to the point that it stops the individual from being able to function well in his or her daily events. So your child may stop hanging out with peers. So maybe your child was hanging out with peers all the time, and then all of a sudden he or she stops, is withdrawn, sullen. Maybe your child had really great sleeping patterns, and then now maybe experiencing insomnia, not being able to sleep or sleeping all the time. You may also see your child having really healthy eating patterns. And then all of a sudden, maybe they're playing with their food. They're taking food and throwing it away. They're eating smaller portions. Or they may be overeating and hiding food. And so those are things that we talk about in terms of, are they severe and persistent, and does it keep them from living their lives? So these are some of the mental health conditions that we often see: autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, eating disorders. I'm not going to go through all of these, but oftentimes we see multiple signs and symptoms in our children who may have autism spectrum disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anxiety and depression disorders. And so what we say is that there are comorbid uh, disorders. And this is why our mental health professionals, our psychiatrists, may take their time in truly diagnosing what is going on with your child. Because not only is your child still developing, their brains are still developing, there are other things that are going on that a psychiatrist may be more likely to take some time, because oftentimes our children will have several diagnoses until there's one that seems to really fit the signs and symptoms. That does have some impact when you have multiple diagnoses, because then it affects your treatment options, medications that they may take or may not take, and so forth. As I mentioned before, there are many factors that can lead to a mental health condition. So genetics, as I mentioned, it runs in my family. Biology, so the neurotransmitters don't talk to each other correctly, the synapses don't work well. There may be trauma. We have experienced a lot of trauma. All of us have at some point experienced trauma through this pandemic. And then environmental stressors, not strangers. And so it changes the way in which we think, we feel, we interact, we behave. But the thing is, mental health conditions are common and treatable. There are no one set of stereotypical faces or looks to mental health condition. You may be around people who you don't even know have a mental health condition. You may yourself may experience mental health conditions and didn't realize that until you were a little bit older. So what are the risks of not intervening? Well, 50% of our students 14 and older with a mental illness will drop out of high school. Twice are more likely to use drugs and alcohol, and 70% of our youth in the justice system have mental health issues. So you've all probably heard about the pipeline, third grade to our criminal justice system pipeline. So by third grade, people have already predicted how many beds we will need or how many jail cells we will need in our criminal justice system. And that's something that we're trying to prevent. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in our ages 15 to 24. But I will also tell you, suicide in our youth, ages 2 to 11, are on the increase, especially because of the pandemic. These are what we typically think about are the faces of teen mental illness, mental health conditions, okay? But I will tell you, the two groups that we tend to overlook are our gifted and talented students, because they have a lot of pressure on them and they may not share what they're experiencing because they have that pressure and those expectations. and then our children who are in special education classes who have learning disabilities as well. And so those tend to be the two populations that we tend to overlook in terms of mental health conditions, but they may have and exhibit signs and symptoms of mental health. Are children who are being bullied because of being different, having learning disabilities, having special ed needs. Um, the bullying really can affect them. It can affect their anxiety and their depression and their sense of isolation that they are not what we consider quote unquote normal. The good news is that if we all are better able to identify the signs and symptoms of mental health condition, that there are better outcomes. So being able to be preventative, we often tend to engage in intervention rather than trying to prevent. And we all know prevention is less costly and it also leads to better outcomes. Um, for example, my cat has hyperthyroidism. We caught it early on. I knew that something was going on. We caught it on. And 3 years later, she's still at the same dosage of her medication. I was able to get her on medication. If we did that for our youth, and for ourselves, to say, oh, something's not going on, something's wrong, not quite right, and just going, receiving help, and then getting the information so that informed decisions can be made in the way that you want to be able to treat what is at hand. More people are talking about mental health today more than ever. I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it is bringing mental health conditions to the forefront. And talking about mental health makes a difference. The more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, the more likely the stereotypes, the stigma will decrease. And so I would like to share with you a teen's perspective about having a mental health condition.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin. I am a college senior studying psychology and pre medicine at St. Edward's University in Austin. Currently, I am taking my classes virtually back in my home city, Houston, home of the Rockets and birthplace of Beyonce. I live with my mom and my dog Snowball. He is such an adorable and sassy Labrador mix, and I'm convinced that he is an old man puppy. My mom and I, we both love to cook and try out new recipes, especially during this quarantine. I also have picked up the hobby of baking, which has been fun. I love to write short stories, to sing, to draw, watch my favorite movies on Netflix, and take naps. Honestly, I just really enjoy being a homebody. I am super excited and grateful to be speaking to you all today about mental health. I am not an expert, but through sharing my personal experience and journey, I hope that I can shed light on the importance of addressing mental wellness and supporting one another. So, where it all began, my struggle with depression, anxiety, and body dysmorphia started to manifest around the seventh grade. For those of you who aren't familiar with body dysmorphia, the simplest and easiest way to put it is that I see something different. When I look in a mirror, there are certain areas of my body that are emphasized to a degree that's not based in reality. It's accompanied by obsessive and compulsive thoughts of my flaws, and it can get really overbearing at times. So, during those teenage years of puberty, my self esteem was not the best. I believed that I was not a good person. Ironically, no one around me was telling me any of those things. It was my own thoughts that told me that I was not a good person and that I didn't matter. I always like to describe depression as a very convincing liar because I believed every single one of those negative notions about myself. To put it simply, I was a people pleaser growing up. I put others before myself, and I struggled with saying the two-letter word no. So, because of that, I would often do things that I truthfully did not want to do, and I developed the mindset that I was a doormat. And as I got older, I started to develop severe anxiety, and I ended up missing out or on enjoying activities. Honestly, the bathroom stall became my safe haven away from everything else, especially when I got really overwhelmed. Unfortunately, I struggled a lot with coping with these feelings and emotions, and I developed very self-destructive mechanisms. I started to self-harm, and I developed eating disordered behaviors and tendencies, and it got to the point where my friends and my teachers noticed the weight loss, the lack of appetite, the scars, and just weird obsessions that I had, especially surrounding my food and appearance. Um, my friends notified my counselor. My counselor had to intervene on multiple occasions and notify my mom. Honestly, at the time, I did resent my friends for exposing me because I felt when adults got involved, it made me feel worse or it made things worse. I would have to call my mom in the middle of her workday and say, "Hey, mom, I did it again," or "I'm struggling," or "I hurt myself." And out of my journey, that was one of the most difficult aspects, is feeling like I was a burden. My mom didn't quite understand why her daughter was harming herself. She felt that I didn't have a reason to, and that I was doing it for attention, and it did put some strain on our relationship. And I also didn't get consistent therapy, and during the moments when I would relapse with self harm, she would respond in absolute anger. She was never, never happy about it. I mean, who would be? But she would sometimes say hurtful or belittling comments out of that anger. Now, I do realize now that those hurtful comments and her anger was not because she didn't love me or didn't care about me. It was because she felt helpless. She was seeing her daughter struggle, and it hurt her to see me hurt. And she just didn't understand mental illness. She didn't know what to do. In Black culture, mental health is very taboo, and the stigma surrounding mental health and wellness, it was not recognized. Mental health was not recognized and acknowledged, and that just spread across generations. So that stigma developed within me, and I internalized a lot more. I just felt like I needed to deal with it on myself and get a grip. And I started to not be able to see myself in the future being happy and achieving my goals, because I honestly had this fear that I was going to become a statistic. I felt like I just wouldn't make it, but I still harbored all that on the inside because I wanted to be perfect. I wanted to appear like I had everything together, and I internalized a lot. And it wasn't until my senior year that I had to challenge that notion and really start putting myself first. So my senior year wasn't the traditional year of excitement that would have been expected. So during that year, my father was hospitalized with tuberculosis and also, unbeknownst to me at the time, colon cancer as well. I was also dealing with the dread of college applications and the natural anxiety of what's next and what will my future be. Also, during my spring break, on top of taking care of my father, my grandmother, I mean, not my grandmother, my grandfather, he fell ill and he was in the ICU unit. And by the end of my spring break, my grandfather passed away. So instead of going off to my senior retreat with my best friends, I was burying my grandfather. That was the first big loss of my life that I had of someone close to me. And my senior year, my mental health was at an all time low. I was physically present at school, but just mentally somewhere else. I couldn't concentrate in my classes. I could barely get any work done, especially when I got home. I felt like I was dragging my body. I was avoiding lunch and hiding from my friends. It just wasn't good. My suicidal ideation increased from being a monthly thing to being a daily thing. And I knew that I was in a position where if I really wanted to persevere and move forward, I couldn't do it by myself anymore. It was just too much for me to try to continue to put on a mask. And so that's why during my senior year, I did take the step of opening up to one of my teachers. And I was absolutely terrified. I went to her with the initial intent to tell her that I was going to turn in a late assignment, and I ended up pouring out my heart instead. And to my surprise, she poured her heart out to me too. She understood what I was going through. She had a father who was sick when she was in graduate school, and she understood the emotions and the fear that I was experiencing. And opening up and receiving her support and understanding was just, I felt this immense amount of relief. And that was one of the best things I could have done for myself, was opening up. And through my mom arranging some things with the teachers, because she's an educator as well, they provided me with a safe space, support, and accountability. So they made sure I would get through the day, get my assignments done, and also that I would be able to receive my hard earned and deserved diploma at the end of the year. And when I graduated, I realized the absolute power of just advocating for yourself and opening up to other people, even though it could be scary. And doing that is what prepared me for the next hard hit that was to come within the following months before going to my first year in college. So, a month before moving to Austin, my father and grandmother passed away, and that's really when the grief introduced itself to me. So, not only was I trying to manage my mental illnesses, I also had to face grief, which is an entire separate thing on its own. And I knew that what I was facing and what I was dealing with was going to be hard. And I realized that I deserve healing and that I needed to advocate for my wellness, both physically, mentally, spiritually. So, my freshman year, I started therapy. My sophomore year, I started medication. And right now, I'm still continuing my healing journey. And it wasn't always easy taking these steps. A lot of times I was scared and embarrassed to do these things, but it was one of the best things I could have done for myself. Through getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, I was able to validate my experiences and begin the journey of true healing. So now, here I am with years of confronting, battling, and living with my mental illnesses. I have a higher sense of optimism for my future. I'm a college senior right now pursuing a career in the medical field. I want to work in psychology. When a few years ago, I didn't even think I would graduate from high school. So there is immense power when you start to advocate for yourself, when you start to put yourself first, and it can be scary at times saying no or being a little selfish. But I can assure you, I always had to constantly remind myself that putting my phone on do not disturb, telling someone no, or just taking some time for myself is not selfish. It does not make you a bad person. You can still be caring, compassionate, and giving, and take care of yourself at the same time. I believe that caring for others and caring for yourself are both acts of kindness and love. And it's a hard skill to develop and maintain and balance. I'm still working on it still. But right now, I've been challenging myself. I've been learning more about my strengths and weaknesses through my journey, through with my mental health. I'm doing things that I probably wouldn't have done a couple of years ago. And I'm just taking each day at a time, just each day at a time. That's what I do. So, although sometimes I feel like my mental illnesses will always play a role in my life for as long as I live, I have hope that I can continue to develop a stronger love for myself and skills to be the best person that I can be and have an impact on those around me. Thank you so much for listening to my story.
So Caitlin is still a volunteer for us. She's an amazing individual and be able to share her story with others, especially for our middle and high school students as well. And so the question becomes, how do you know when it's typical behavior or something more serious? As you heard Caitlin share about her experiences, about knowing that something was wrong and how her mother reacted, and her mother didn't really know how to handle or address what her daughter was experiencing. All of you may also experience similar situations with your child and maybe asking yourselves, what is going on? So do any of these feelings, are they familiar to you? Are you concerned? Do you worry? Um, are your children being reluctant? Do they feel overwhelmed? Do you feel overwhelmed? And also, do you also experience some frustration with other people, including the school or medical professionals? Our youth may also experience frustration when their experiences that they're sharing are not understood or being dismissed. So the question becomes, when we talk about mental health conditions for our youth, because I mentioned that it is a social emotional development because they're going through that process still, is how do we fulfill our adolescent needs? think about that as parents and even as educators, for those who are educators. How do we fulfill our adolescents' developmental needs? So, the first suggestion we have is that we take action now, being preventative. We understand that protective relationships that allow for connection and strong bonds are a protective factor for our youth, for our adolescents. They also need support. They need support in how they receive treatment. They need support in how they're fostered to be able to share their experience. They're empowered to share their experience. And then also allowing for their mental health and our mental health to be a priority in our lives. So, once again, I like to emphasize that reinforcing mental well being is just as important as physical health, and also for our youth, their academic performance. We can also establish consistency in routines. So, when you think about your children returning to school, being back in person after being virtual or having a hybrid, think about the routines. What routines are helping them be able to place their mental health as a priority? What might they have struggled with as they return back to school? What did you struggle with in terms of their mental health? And then we also need easily accessible mental health supports for adolescents. So that means our healthcare providers being able to use screening tools to help you and your child understand what is going on. For schools, I advocate for consultations and evaluations, and then support groups. And we have a lot of support groups that are available, that are free, through Nami Central Texas, and also through our partner, the Seek Institute, which their information is later in the presentation. As I mentioned earlier, the keys to early recognition is the severity and persistence. So a child or teen with a mental health condition has thoughts, moods, and or behaviors that are constant, unrelieved, and challenging. So there's severity and persistency in what they are experiencing. What might be some early warning signs? Well, feeling very sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks. So this is often used for criteria for depression. So are they sad or withdrawn? And do things that you do for them or they try to do to make them happy or make them more sociable not work? So the things that used to work for them no longer work for them is a sign that they may have a mental health condition. They may also engage in severe, out of control, risk taking behaviors that can cause harm to selves or others. So, are they taking more risks? Were they adverse to risks when at one point, but now they're doing things, they're testing themselves, testing others, hurting other people, or threatening to hurt other people, or even animals? Um, Sometimes they may experience this sudden overwhelming fear for no reason. They may have a racing heartbeat, physical discomfort, or fast breathing. If you ever observe somebody experience a panic attack, then you know what some of the signs and symptoms that they experience are. For example, my niece, when she experiences panic attacks, anxiety, I can physically see her shaking. She's shaking uncontrollably. She's gasping for air. She starts to sweat. And so, one of the things that I do when I witness this and observe this is help her to ground. So, helping her to look at things around her, letting her know that she can make it through, breathing with her. So, using my breathing techniques to help her calm down her breathing techniques. I never touch her because I don't want to escalate what she is experiencing, but to be able to talk to her in a soothing way, to let her know that I am here for her. She's not alone. And to also allow her to be able to use what she needs to be able to get out of the panic attack. They may have severe mood swings. So one minute they're really happy, and the next minute they're angry or they're crying. Um, and you just don't understand what is causing those mood swings. They may have drastic changes in their mood and behavior or personality, or as I said earlier, their sleeping and even their eating habits. And then, maybe they are irritable more so than before, and they just can't get out of being irritable. They may have difficulty concentrating or staying still. That puts the person in physical danger or causes school failure. They may have intensive worries or fears. Um, Again, they may be using laxatives or not easing to lose that weight. Or they may have that significant weight loss or weight gain. Perhaps you've noticed that your alcohol that you may keep in your home is decreasing, or the medication that you have might be decreasing as well. So we always say it's important to make sure that those items are stored safely, or maybe they're starting to experiment and or are using drugs. Also, we look at self-harm. So does your child wear clothing that is inappropriate for the time of year or even the weather? I say that this to school educators to say if it's really like hot, 90s, 100s, and child is coming fully clothed and doing this more often than not, then oftentimes we're saying that there may be something that the child is hiding, the adolescent is hiding, and that can be the self-harm. And also they may be making plans for suicide. So what can you do as parents and caregivers and guardians? The first thing is to create a trusting and safe environment and space. Communication is essential. And I know for many of you, you may not feel comfortable yet to talk about mental health conditions. How do we become comfortable? Especially as I mentioned, in my household, we never talked about mental health conditions. So if you've never engaged in conversations as a child yourself with adults, then how are you supposed to be able to engage in conversation with your child? But communication is essential. We also want to be calm and actively listen, especially to the nonverbal language. Nonverbal language is the form of communication our youth tend to use the most, and that is one of the downsides of the pandemic. They could not be around each other, so they weren't learning from each other through their nonverbal language. They weren't communicating through their nonverbal language. Excuse me, we want to respond with empathy and acceptance, provide hope and reassurance, and also to know what our resources are, what's available to us. I also say we have to be able to prioritize our own mental health. We can't help others with their mental health if we aren't addressing our own mental health. And we do not need to wait for a crisis to talk about mental health. So some tips for establishing communication, because I said that's essential and crucial, is, have a happy hour with your child where it's a me time, where you provide your child with 30 minutes to decompress. So oftentimes, I know from my own experience, I would come home from school and the first thing out of my mother's mouth is, how was your school day? So rather than asking about their school day or their day, just allow them to come home and decompress and let them do what they enjoy to do for 30 minutes or so, whatever time amount you think is appropriate, they think is appropriate. Having some one-on-one time that is void of technology, because our youth now are becoming technologically dependent, cyber dependency. Engage in something that is important and of interest of your child. You get to learn more about your child through their interests. And then having regular conversations that have no consequences for what they share with you. And again, what they share with you may cause your heartbeat to raise, you to sweat, your mouth to get dry. But remember, we have to be able to respond calmly and with empathy and acceptance of what they're sharing with you. Be present for your child. So we tend to minimize, ignore things that are youth are saying to us, and we have to be able to accept what they're sharing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, without blaming or judging or insisting that it's attention-seeking behavior. We want to be able to use I messages. So I'm here for you. I want to learn more about what you're going through. I understand what you're experiencing, or I don't understand what you're experiencing. However, I want to be able to better understand what you're experiencing. Thank your child for sharing. Comment on how brave and courageous it is to be able to say, this is what I'm feeling or experiencing or thinking, for trusting you to be able to share what he or she is experiencing. So our youth oftentimes don't feel like they can really share, converse with adults in their lives. And if your child doesn't feel comfortable sharing with you, say to your child, it's okay to go to somebody who you trust. Don't take things personally. Don't blame yourselves. We tend to, as parents, may blame yourselves because your child is not opening up. What am I doing wrong? Sometimes children may just need other people who are safe to be able to talk to because they don't want to hurt you. Just like Caitlin said, her mom didn't know how to respond. She didn't want to hurt her mom. Or put her through that stress. And so we have to try to think from the perspective of our adolescents. You can also ask your child to tell you more about things. It's important for us to be able to identify our emotions in order to help our children understand their emotions and identify their emotions. So you may say, I am sad that you are experiencing X, Y, and Z. I am sad. I am angered that you're being bullied. Things like that. And then being able to do regular check-ins with your child, using some kind of activity, as I mentioned, the one-on-ones, the regular conversation, having date nights with your children can be really important. So it's all about creating that connection and the sense of support, that they really feel like they are being supported, and have that strong connection with you or with another trusted adult. Also, we want to focus on your concern for your child, and because problem solving can be collaborative. So we tend to use the I focus rather than the we focus. And when we talk about mental health conditions, we want to use a we focus approach. How are we going to problem solve this together? And as parents, caregivers, guardians, it's important to give yourself permission not to know the answer. As adults, we think we always need to know the answer, and we don't. And it's okay not to know. And it's okay to share that message with our children, that we always won't know the answer, just as when they hopefully become adults, won't always know the answers. But we can find those answers, and we can find them together. Draw on your child's strengths and use positive coping skills. I always say, be active. Go and have family time together. Today, even though all of my siblings and I are in our 40s and 50s, we still eat dinner together, meals together with our parents when we go home to see our parents. Our parents instilled that in us. We have game nights together. Our technology is put away. Our parents didn't have to talk about that. We just knew that family time together is that one-on-one time with each other for that connection and bonding, and being able to have conversations, robust and serious conversations, which often don't talk about mental health, but we're slowly starting to bring it in. But it's important to be able to have that time together and to be able to use each other's strengths and skill sets. So the next one, I did talk about started talking about effective communication skills, and I'm going to skip the Brene Brown empathy. But if you want it, let me know. I will send it to you. But she talks about empathy, and I talk about empathy. So empathy is really understanding where people are coming from, being able to use statements, and I'm sorry. So empathy also uses the I statements. You know, I'm am speaking in a very specific and direct manner. I'm at the center of communication. I take complete responsibility for my feelings and opinions. I don't waver. I say what I mean. So example is that I don't like it when trash is left over your all over your room. Um, Whereas you statements tend to put people on the defensive mode. And so oftentimes our children may become defensive, and we don't want them to feel defensive. We don't want them to feel like we're blaming them or judging them or making assumptions or generalizing a specific problem and beginning that snowball effect, um, or to vent our negative feelings. So again, being able to identify your emotions. I'm very angry about this. I'm excited. I'm so happy for you. So starting off your I statements with what you are feeling, what you are thinking, and being able. So I'm really excited that you did really well in school today. And tell me more about what was going on for you. We also reflect our response, use reflection in our responses. So we want to acknowledge our teens' reality of their lived experience. It is very true and real for them. So that's why I say let's try not to just be dismissive or ignore or diminish what they're experiencing. Because when we do that, we're sending them messages that what they're experiencing is not valid, is untrue. And that's not what we want to be sending them the message, because they one day will become adults, or that is what we hope. We want to focus the response on what your child is experiencing and must be feeling rather than what you are feeling. Communicate that you understand what your teen believes and how he or she feels, and provide a normalizing framework of experiences, thoughts, and feelings. So, for example, when I'm with my niece, I say, you know, I see that you're having a panic attack and it's very scary. I too feel very scared about this, and I'm here to help you. You're not alone in this. I am here, and I will do whatever I need to do to help you through this panic attack. Take a look around you, focus on the wall in front of you, focus on this. I can feel your heartbeat in my body. So being able to share your experience and keep the focus on your child too. To say you are not alone is normalizing. You may think that this is strange and that there's something wrong. There is nothing wrong with you. There are a lot of people who experience panic attacks and anxiety. So just some ways to start the mental health conversation and normalizing. You may give some data, some facts. So I recently learned that 1 in 6 teens are impacted by mental health issues, but only half of them are getting help. What do you think about this? Or we have a family history of whatever. So I want to talk to you about that so we can be proactive in noticing the signs if that's applicable. Or the pandemic has really impacted everyone's mental health. And I've read that teens have had an increase in anxiety and depression. Have you noticed that in your friends and your schoolmates and other teens? And how do you start the conversation when you're concerned? I've noticed that your blank is everything okay. I've noticed that you don't seem like yourself lately, and I'm concerned. I'm, you may use emotion. I'm, I'm concerned and feeling a little bit uncertain, sad. Um, I'm here to listen to you. Have anything you need to talk about? Or have I ever told you that blank runs in our family? There are some genetic reasons why you may be feeling this. So all normalizing. You may also say, I love you so much. I love you so much. And I worry when I hear you talking and acting this way. May we talk about it? Or would you like to talk to somebody else about what's going on? I know it's hard to talk about how you're feeling, but I'm here to listen and help in any way I can. You can count on me. You're not alone. And don't hesitate to set an appointment for your teen if you think they'll benefit from visiting a professional, and you yourself may benefit from visiting a professional as well. Mental health and suicide. 90% of those who die by suicide have an underlying mental health condition, and suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States for all of us. And as I mentioned earlier, we are seeing the rates of suicide increasing with our youth. And so the suspected suicide attempts increased by 22% in the summer of 2020 compared to 2019. And it became 39% higher in the winter of 2020. We saw a 51% increase in females in the winter of 2020 for suicide attempts compared to 2019. And so these numbers are staggering. And this is another reason for needing to be able to have the conversation about mental health conditions and also about suicide. And so again, many of you may not know how to start the conversation about suicide or feel comfortable about, because we weren't taught that when we were younger about how to talk about this, because suicide was taboo. It was wrong. And what we're saying is when we talk about suicide and become comfortable, so you can use statistics. Did you know that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States? What do you think about that? What do you think causes people to die by suicide? Have you ever thought about dying by suicide? You know, I want you to know that you can come to me to talk about it. Oftentimes suicide comes from feeling isolated, disappointed, also that nobody cares about you. It comes from not thinking that you have any meaning, can come from being bullied and so forth. It comes from a place of pain. And so if we can address the pain and hurt, we can help prevent suicide. So being able to recognize that our youth are oftentimes experiencing pain and hurt, and being able to talk about it, and being able to come up with solutions together, problem solving together. You are not in this alone. They are not in this alone. That is why we say it's a we focus. Some warning signs of suicide: feeling like a burden, being isolated, withdrawn, feeling trapped or in unbearable pain, looking for a way to access lethal means, expressing hopelessness, sleeping too little or too much, talking or posting about wanting to die, unnecessary risk-taking, giving away possessions, prized possessions, neglecting the personal experience, the lack of response to praise, affirmations, and making plans for suicide. So what can you do? What should you do? Take the signs, warning signs seriously. Oftentimes when we hear children say, oh, I want to kill myself, and then you may think, oh, it's attention seeking, or they say, no, I was just joking. What that says to me is that they're experiencing something that they need to be able to share and find appropriate ways to share, rather than saying, I want to kill myself. So what we say is, when you say you want to kill yourself, I get really scared. And now you're telling me you don't want to kill yourself. So what is going on? To help me understand that, I want to learn and be able to help you, so that when you get to the point where you say, I want to kill myself, you're able to really share what it is that you are thinking, feeling, experiencing. Ask the question. This is really difficult for people, but it's important for us to be able to ask point blank, are you thinking about killing yourself? Just because you ask doesn't plant that seed in their mind. When you say that, and if they are thinking about killing themselves, to be able to follow up and say, I'm here for you if you are. Let's find a way to address what you're experiencing. If they say yes, then you may need to seek additional support in terms of being able to address the yes, if you don't know how to address the yes. So sometimes when people are struggling or experiencing depression, they think about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? Is another way to be able to ask. Do you have a plan? The Columbia suicide severity rating is a 6-point scale. Well, it's a 6-question. It's simple. It's evidence-based. Anybody can use it. And so I put the link in the PowerPoint, and actually Dana has the PowerPoint in PDF, and so you'll be able to click on it to open it up. We tend to use these to address whether or not someone has suicidal ideation. And just to remember to stay calm, use I language when possible, practice active listening, and invite your teen into a dialogue. Affirm their feelings, don't minimize the intensity of what they're feeling. Assure them they are not alone, and we'll be there. You'll be there to help and support them. Again, that we focus. And acknowledge that it is okay not to be okay. What I say to parents and children who I've worked with is that oftentimes there's an emotion or emotions that underlie the mental health condition in which the parent or the child is experiencing. And so as long as they're able to function with that underlying, it's okay to have that underlying emotion. So the example that I give to help everybody explain this or to understand this more clearly is for those who know Hulk Hogan. When he gets really angry, that severity and persistency to where he develops into the Hulk, he becomes angry, right? It's so severe and persistent that he becomes the Hulk. But in one of the movies, when they say to him, Bruce, we need you to get angry, and his response is, I'm always angry. That's what I'm talking about. Even when he's not the Hulk, he's always angry, but he's able to manage his anger so he doesn't become the Hulk. When he becomes the Hulk, it's because he's not able to manage it. It's become so severe and persistent that it then becomes the Hulk. And what we are trying to do is help people manage so they don't escalate to that Hulk symptom experience. And then we also say use the mental health day. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay not to know how to help your child or to be able to answer their questions. But what you do know is that it's okay to ask for help. I know for certain cultures, asking for help is taboo. And I'm hoping that we are able to say it's okay. And so these are some ways to ask for help. And then what should you do next? Keep your teen engaged. Talk with your pediatrician. Ask them about the effects of medications and changing them. This is really important because parents often think when they change a medication for their child and their child seems happy and normal, that the problems have been solved. And actually, it can be a mask. And so I've worked with parents who have children who have died by suicide when they said they were happy on this new medication. They seemed like things were normal. And then they died by suicide, and I don't understand. And it's because oftentimes when there's a change in medication, there's a 2-week interchange for medications. So oftentimes during that 2 weeks when they're weaning off one medication, starting another, they have 2 medications in their system. And so it's really important for parents and guardians, if they're putting their children on medication, to be able to be equipped to be able to talk about medications and changes and what they should be on the lookout for with their doctors. And that's one of the things that I help parents and guardians be able to do. And also for the children to say, this is how you talk about. What are the side effects? What are possible things I should be on the lookout for in myself or with my children? Should I be on high alert during this time? And then how do I know if it's really working or my child is masking? What I say then is to go back to making sure you have those regular check-ins, spending time with your child, having that open conversation, that safe and trusted environment, making sure your schools know when your children are on medications and there's a change. Get a referral to a mental health specialist. Connect with other families and get support and education. Learn more about the mental health conditions that your child may be experiencing or been diagnosed with. Nami Central Texas, we are a community resource. We offer resources for parents, the support groups, classes, a lending library, information. You can contact me if you have more questions or need resources, and I will try my best to get you what you need. Education and accurate information are key to understanding, and peer support diminishes that isolation. So we do have a resource repository on our website. I can also send you, Dana, what we have that we hand out so she can give it to all of you. We offer a NAMI Basics course, which is actually now on demand, so it's based on your time to help you understand more about mental health conditions. It goes beyond what this presentation. We also offer a middle and high school ending assignments, so they learn about mental health conditions and how to end the assignments, start the conversation. We offer parents and teachers as allies. It's no longer a NAMI signature program. And this is for our school professionals to understand what is the difference between bad behavior and symptoms of a mental health condition and how to work with parents and guardians under their school's protocols and policies. And then Seek Institute, they have Real Talk for Parents and teacher and staff support groups, which are free. So we help co-sponsor this as well. And they're virtual. And then our information. So at this time, are there any questions I see that we have some 14 responses in the chat, and I'm sorry that I didn't have it open as I was talking.
It's okay, Rebecca. I've responded to all of them, so the chat's
wonderful.
Pretty good.
Okay.
Do any of you guys have questions? My email address is in the chat, so please feel free to send me an email if you have any more questions. There's also a link that only has 4 questions on there for me to know what you guys want to see in future learning opportunities. So give me just take a little time to fill those out as well. And I think Rebecca has a survey as well.
Yes. That should open up when you close out, and it shouldn't take too long. It is anonymous. We love the feedback, to have the feedback, because this is one of our local programs that our former executive director created, and then I modified based on my experience working with children and parents and caregivers, and what other information may be useful to be able to share with you all that you will find useful. So we appreciate the feedback, and it is anonymous, so I won't know. I won't be like, oh, so and so said this.
Thank you, Rebecca, for joining us today. I appreciate you, and thank you guys for being our guests at our first parent and family engagement empowerment lesson. We will definitely have more, so let us know what you guys want to hear. And again, it's Dana, DANA .Wilcott, WILCOTT at pfisd.net. Thank you all. We'll see you on our next time.
Thank you, Dana.